Welcome, everybody. Cheers. And we are going to go ahead and do a deep dive into the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, misery is going to get company. Ezekiel is writing from a bad situation to more than 10,000 fellow Jews in the same situation. They're all exiled, a 1,000-mile walk from home, and living in the heart of Babylon, living in the heart of the Babylonian Empire in what is now Iraq. Babylon had already invaded the Jewish nation twice, first in 605 BC. That was to introduce themselves as the new world superpower, replacing Assyria, which they had just crushed. They also took the occasion to demand that the Jews send them tax money each year. The Babylonians came again 8 years later in 597 BC. They did this to collect their taxes after the Jewish king decided to stop sending money. It was during this second invasion that Babylon took thousands of Jews with them, Ezekiel included, political prisoners of sorts. Many were free to live as they pleased in Babylon, as long as they didn't try to go home. Ezekiel is a priest, which means he now has nothing to do. The work of a priest takes place in the Jerusalem temple, which for Ezekiel is a long and forbidden commute. But God gives him a new job. Ezekiel becomes a prophet to the Jewish exiles. Boiled down to the basics, Ezekiel's message has 2 points. 1, God is going to allow the Babylonians to destroy what remains of the Jewish nation and to exile most Jews who survived the onslaught. And 2, God will eventually send the Jews back home to rebuild their nation to levels of glory never seen before. Ezekiel's message, though hard to hear, at least offers hope. It assures the Jews that even though they're in breach of contract for breaking their ancient promise to serve God, they are still the chosen people. God will punish them for their centuries of sin, but punishment isn't God's final word. Ezekiel and the other Bible prophets don't end their messages with doom and gloom. Their messages end with God's punishment achieving its effect: repentance, forgiveness, and restoration. For Jews in exile, Ezekiel says they can go count that. For Jews in exile, Ezekiel says they can count on going home. The main point of the book of Ezekiel: God is going to allow invaders to shut down the Jewish nation, destroying the cities and exiling the citizens, but in time God will restore the Jewish nation. The writer, Ezekiel, a priest and a prophet, most of the book is written in the first person of Ezekiel himself, but there are occasional insertions that seem added later, such as the Lord gave this message to Ezekiel, son of Buzi, a priest beside the Kabar River in the land of the Babylonians. The date: at age 25 in 597 BC, the priest Ezekiel is taken captive to Babylon. 5 years later, he begins 22 years of ministry as a prophet from 593 to 571 BC. The location: Babylon, an empire headquartered in what is now Iraq. The empire's capital is also called Babylon, located about 50 miles south of Baghdad. But Ezekiel's first vision takes place beside an irrigation canal called Kabar. That's near the ancient city of Nippur, about 100 miles south of Baghdad. Ezekiel's bizarre calling. Ezekiel 3:4. Son of man, go to the people of Israel and give them my messages. There's nothing especially unusual about the words God speaks to Ezekiel, calling him to become a prophet, but the pomp and circumstance surrounding those words are so wildly bizarre that some modern readers speculate that Ezekiel sees a UFO. Whatever he sees, it flies. It can turn instantly in any direction, and it's accompanied by creatures that look part human, part animal, and part angel. Some Jewish interpreters say Ezekiel's description can bring to mind the Ark of the Covenant, the gold-plated chest that held the Ten Commandments. That's partly because the flying object contains God, and though it's a celestial chariot carrying his throne, the ark is described as the Lord's chariot, complete with gold cherubim whose wings were stretched out over the ark, and that is in 1 Chronicles 28:18. Everything Ezekiel sees is part of a vision, perhaps during a trance-like state. God generally spoke to prophets through dreams and visions. 5 years into Ezekiel's exile, in the year 593 BC, 30-year-old Ezekiel has this vision in which he sees God approaching him. At first it looks like a storm coming, led by a massive cloud consumed in light, some flashing. Ezekiel 1:26. Out of the cloud emerge 4 humanoid creatures, each with 4 wings and 4 faces: human, lion, ox, and eagle. They're pulling what appears to be God's throne loaded onto a chariot. On this throne high above was a figure whose appearance resembled a man. Some early Christian writers, such as Irenaeus in the AD 100s, said these 4 creatures symbolize the evangelist believed to have written the 4 Gospels. Those symbols stuck in paintings of the evangelist often show them alongside the symbol that represents them. Matthew with the man, Mark the lion, Luke the ox, and John the eagle. In the minds of some early Christian scholars, these evangelists did what the 4 creatures of Ezekiel's vision did. They delivered the glory of God. Ezekiel sees God himself glowing and surrounded by a halo of light. Ezekiel falls face down, but God orders him to stand up and then commissions him as a prophet. And on this side note, Bible books rated PG-30. Some scenes in Ezekiel are horrifying, with symbolic writing at times beyond comprehension. For these reasons, some early rabbis banned the book for anyone under the age of 30. The Song of Solomon was banned by some as well because of its erotic dialogue. And right here, Ezekiel's Tel Aviv. Israel's most cosmopolitan city took its name in 1909 from the first Jewish community to hear Ezekiel's message. The prophet went to Tel Aviv. It means hill of the spring. It was located beside an irrigation channel near Nippur, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, changing the Arabic spelling to Hebrew. Oh. The Jews named their coastal city Tel Aviv to symbolize the rebirth of Israel, which Ezekiel predicted. When God, in a vision, called Isaiah into ministry about 150 years earlier, an angel prepared Isaiah to deliver sacred messages by purifying his lips with a piece of coal taken from heaven's altar. Ezekiel, however, is given a scroll to eat. He notices that the scroll is filled with writing on both sides, funeral songs, words of sorrow, and pronouncements of doom. And that's in Ezekiel 2:10. Even eating experience like this, Jeremiah at least uses a similar metaphor in Jeremiah 15:16. When I discovered your words, Jeremiah said, referring to the full extent of God's message, which included the restoration of Israel, I devoured them. They are my joy and my heart's delight. The scene of Ezekiel feasting on the celestial scroll is a graphic way of letting everyone know that the words he will speak are not his own, but God's. Bad news for the Jews. Ezekiel 6:3-4 and 7. I am about to bring war upon you. I will kill your people in front of your idols. The place will be littered with corpses, and you will know that I alone am the Lord. Perhaps more than any other Bible prophet, Ezekiel delivers bad news with a flair for drama. Words aren't enough. He draws pictures, sometimes with his actions and sometimes with actual drawings. His first prophecy, in fact, begins with a picture drawn on a clay brick. Ezekiel 4:1 and 2. Draw a map of the city of Jerusalem. God tells him, surround the city with the siege ramps and battering rams. This is to show the Jewish exiles what is going to happen back in their homeland. Next, God tells Ezekiel to show the people why it's going to happen and why it had already happened to the northern Jewish nation of Israel more than a century earlier. Ezekiel shows them he lies on his left side for 390 days, described as one day for each year of Israel's sin. He lies on his right side for 40 days, representing 40 years of Judah's sin. These numbers baffle Bible experts. The northern nation of Israel survived on its own for only about 200 years, and Judah sinning off and on, depending on the king of the moment, extended more than 300 years. If Ezekiel's numbers are to be taken literally, perhaps the 390 years represent when Israel started sinning during the time of the judges, and perhaps the 40 years represents the especially evil periods of Judah's existence. Scholars offer a variety of other theories as well. Numbers aside, the point is that God will punish the Jews for a long history of sinning. In other prophecies, that Ezekiel acts out. He eats bread cooked over a fire fueled by manure. Ezekiel 4:15. This shows that the Jews will have to eat unclean, non-kosher food to survive. And 2, shaves his head and beard, then divides the hair into 3 equal parts. Ezekiel 5:1. He puts a third in the center of his picture map of Jerusalem and burns it, representing Jews who will die when the city is burned. He scatters another third of the map and chops it with a sword, representing those killed in the vicinity, and he scatters the final third of the wind, representing those who survive, though many end up exiled. And 3, trembles while eating. Ezekiel 12:18. This shows that the Jews in Jerusalem and throughout the nation will tremble with fear for their lives as they eat. What does God have against the Jews? God had to set them apart as a holy nation, as an example of how he wants everyone to live, devoted to him. But not only do the Jews fail to live up to those higher standards, God says in Ezekiel 5:7 and 9, you have not even lived up to the standards of the nations around you. Because of your detestable idols, I will punish you like I have never punished anyone before or ever will again. God leaves town. Ezekiel 10:18. The glory of the Lord moved out from the door of the temple. Living in exile, Ezekiel and the other Jews have no place to worship. Many historians speculate that the synagogue got its start here during the exile. Jews would meet in one another's homes to worship as best they could by reading their sacred writings. One tiny shred of evidence comes from Ezekiel 8. The prophet is at his home meeting with former leaders of Judah. It's a little more than a year into his ministry, September 17th, 592 BC. This precise date is possible because Ezekiel refers to several events in his prophecy that can be cross-checked with dates in Babylonian records. During this meeting, he had another vision. He's transported 1,000 miles to Jerusalem. There he sees God's first and most important commandment being broken in the temple precincts. The commandment, you must not have any other God but me, Exodus 23. The offense, a statue of an idol, the god of some other nation, stands near the temple altar. Do you see the detestable sins the people of Israel are committing to drive me from my temple? God asked the prophet, Ezekiel 8:6. As the vision continues, Ezekiel sees a cloud of glory hovering inside the courtyard where the altar is kept. That's the courtyard closest to the sanctuary where only priests and Jewish men are allowed. The cloud of glory has a long history with the Jews. It starts with the glowing pillar of cloud that led them out of Egypt and into the promised land that became Israel. It continues with when they build their first worship center, a tent tabernacle that they carried with them during their 40 years in the Badlands. When the tent was completed, the cloud covered the tabernacle and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Exodus 40:34. Whenever the cloud left the tent, this was the cue for Moses and the Israelites to follow along on the next leg of their journey. When Solomon built and dedicated this very temple that Ezekiel is seeing in his vision, God responded with the honor of his presence. At that moment, a thick cloud filled the temple of the Lord. The priest could not continue their service. The priest could not continue their service because of the cloud, for the glorious presence of the Lord filled the temple of God. 2 Chronicles 5:13 and 14. Seeing this, Solomon declared, O Lord, you have said that you would live in a thick cloud of darkness. Now I have built a glorious temple for you, a place where you can live forever. 2 Chronicles 6:1 and 2. Forever ends on September 17th, 592 BC. God has left the building and the city and the nation. The Jews will have no one but themselves to stop the next wave of Babylonian invaders, and it won't be enough. The invaders arrive at Jerusalem 4.5 years later on January 15th, 488 BC. After destroying the other walled cities of Judah, the Babylonians surround Jerusalem, sealing it up and starving the citizens for 2.5 years. Babylon's soldiers break through the walls on July 18th, 586 BC. Then they start killing the citizens and setting fire to the buildings. August is spent dismantling the stone buildings and walls, one stone at a time, until the capital of the Jewish nation looks like a junkyard for cut rock. Many Jewish survivors are taken captive to Babylon, where they join Ezekiel in the community of Jews exiled years earlier. Some Jews are left behind to tend the fields. Visions of God returning. Ezekiel 43:4 and 7. The glory of the Lord came into the temple through the east gateway. The Lord said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place where I will rest my feet. I will live here forever among the people of Israel. Once the hammer falls on Jerusalem, Ezekiel's message takes a turn for the better. The Jews have lost just about everything, and the good news at the bottom of a pit that the only way to go is up. That's the message Ezekiel starts preaching. Things are going to get better. First, he targets Judah's neighbor nations. He warns that they'll get what they deserve for treating God's people so horribly for so many years. Then he gives the Jews a peek into their destiny. With the help of his best-known vision, God whisked him away in spirit to a valley covered in a scattering of human bones. It must have looked like a massacre took place there, with the bodies abandoned. That's exactly what happens to many of the Jews in Jerusalem. Suddenly, bones all over the valley begin to rattle, snapping back into their joints. Then out of nowhere, tendons, muscles, and skin begin erupting onto the bones, lacing them with humanity. A wind sweeps into the valley, blowing life into the mouths of the nostrils of the newly formed bodies. Then those bodies come to life. Much the same thing happened when God blew the breath of life into the first human at creation, and when the Holy Spirit rushed like a windstorm into the upper room at Pentecost, bringing Jesus' disciples back to spiritual life. These bones represent the people of Israel, God tells Ezekiel. Ezekiel 37:11 and 12. Prophesy to them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I will open your graves of exile and cause you to rise again. Then I will bring you back to the land of Israel. God is coming back with them. Ezekiel sees this in a vision and a wonderful temple rebuilt. He sees God returning to that familiar cloud of glory. Bible experts don't agree on what temple Ezekiel is talking about. It is the temple that the returning Jews built and dedicated in 516 BC. Some Jewish scholars wonder if it's the temple the Messiah will build when he comes, or perhaps it's a symbol of some wonderful day ahead, maybe at the end of time, when people worship God as they should in a place forever called by a new name. The Lord is there. Ezekiel 48:35. The Lord is there. Stay blessed. Stay caffeinated. Much love.